Hey, how's it going? Well, I know I said in the last video or so that I wanted to be more active with posting on YouTube, but then I got busy, and so I recorded a lot of this, and then it just kind of been sitting there in limbo, and I've been going in and slowly editing it. But in the meantime, I thought it was interesting because I was talking about the so-called draft in this whole video, and I saw a headline today when I woke up from Reason that the House passes bill to automatically register young men for the draft. The selective service should be abolished, not made more efficient and equitable. Of course, that's the subtext there. And of course, right, the draft is slavery, it's just a euphemism for slavery, military conscription, which is a euphemism for slavery, or technical term to describe slavery. So the House passed a large defense bill Friday evening that included a provision that would automatically enroll young men between ages of 18 and 26 for the selective service, as they call it here. So, this is a version of the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. Of course, and again, it authorizes about $895 billion in military spending, and it passed by a vote of 217 to 199. So I guess that's almost 200 people opposed it. Reason is saying it's unlikely to be picked up by the Democrat-controlled Senate because of numerous amendments regarding abortion, diversity efforts, and transgender medical treatments. Under the title of this, the NDAA, I don't understand what we're talking about, abortion maybe in the military context or something. I'm not sure what abortion, transgender medical treatments have to do unless they're specifically have to do with national defense, unless they're specifically dealing with as it relates to individuals in the state's armed enforcement wing. So it's just interesting. But so as I was looking for this and through this and stuff, and I came across another interesting trend because I saw an advertisement on Facebook a couple of weeks ago that was saying that the National Guard, it was an advertisement for National Guard recruitment that said that they increased their age, now the age limit. Now I can't find that one in particular, but when I went to Google to search for this and I went to the news, we've got stuff going back all the way to 2023. Air Force raises age limit for recruits to 42. That was in October 23 from Air and Space Forces magazine. Stars and Stripes also mentions it on the same day. So it's interesting that these are all like, here goes. Okay, so here's Fox News. Air Force hopes raising maximum age of enlistment to new high will ease recruiting crisis. And of course, that was November 10th. So interestingly, that's very interesting because like the quote alternative press here is on October 27th, and Fox News, apparently their first mention of it's November 10th of 2023. So, the less armed thugs of the state, the better, in my opinion. Yes, they're undergoing a crisis, and now this is their version of supply and demand on as far as cannon fodder and slaves go. Is we can't outright just shackle them anymore, but now what we can do is we can, last year they increased the enlistment. I guess that wasn't moving fast enough for them. So now they're just going to automatically register people. If they ever instituted it, I mean, would they find out if somebody didn't? They'd probably go through their citizen log and say, hey, this guy never filed the paperwork. I mean, would that really matter? Would they not know who he was? I'm not sure. It just definitely seems like right because it makes perfect sense. It's not some revolutionary observation here. It's just the observation of the fact that the war machine just keeps growing, and or apparently it's not when it comes to bodies, at least, which is a good thing as far as an indicator of sentiment towards the state and its conflicts. Conservatives might view that as the country dying out or something, like our patriotism is waning. But hopefully those people would realize that, well, of course, why would we sign up for these insane, ridiculous wars that have nothing to do with us and are clearly just, grabs for resources, mostly, it seems. So just a quick addition there. That was a pretty interesting development as I've been working on this particular video. Even before I was an anarchist, I've always been against the so-called draft. It was always obvious that there was something wrong with that. It was wrong for anyone else, the state, anyone else, to force somebody else to fight in their battle, right? That was pretty obviously unethical by my personal views. But for, since becoming an anarchist now for over 10 years and literally describing this as it is, as slavery and such, and arguing against the so-called draft with conservatives or whatever for however many years, only just today, in fact, was I informed of the hilarious fact that not only are so-called U.S. citizens, undocumented immigrants are also required by law to register for selective service. Now, I don't know, maybe this was just a matter of consistency on their part, because, I mean, did they really think that a undocumented immigrant is going to come into the office and sign up to be part of the draft? Probably not. Okay, here I am. I mean, maybe there's some clause in there that says they can't be held, they can't be arrested for that or something, or deported or anything. No type of legal proceedings can be taken against them or something. But maybe that could be some sort of entrapment. Maybe, I'm not sure, but it just seems completely absurd and utterly hilarious that would be in there. To give them the benefit of the doubt, I guess it's just a matter of consistency. Yep, yeah, well, they're here, they came here illegally, but they're not supposed to be here, and this is still the law, so if you're in our jurisdiction, then you need to obey the law. I just thought that was pretty funny. Another thing I'm looking at here, if you notice, for everything that's been going on with the transgender arguments and everything like this, it's interesting to me that it says that transgender people who were assigned male gender at birth still have to sign up. So it's almost like the state is kind of saying, like, we do not believe in or acknowledge your claim here, regardless of what our own legal paperwork might say. We're going to go by your gender at birth and so on and so forth. So I thought that was pretty interesting because, yeah, it's just kind of, when it comes to combat, when it comes to sacrificing your life, the state it's not going to let you get away with that one. Trying to get out of defending your country. Another funny thing here is when you Google for the selective services system, there, the title of their page says, "It's your country, protect it." And it's just, I mean, in light of the fact that conscription is here, the draft is coerced. That's wild, because it's your country, protect it, or else we're going to put you in jail, or we're going to threaten you to do so, because that's what's right. It's your country, damn it. You need to protect it. And considering that they say undocumented immigrants also have to register for selective service, it's not your country, but you also have to protect it if you're going to come around here, I guess. Hey, I'm sure conservatives say it's only right. You're here, you're using our roads. Oh, another interesting fact is that if you work abroad and live abroad while you're working, the IRS still demands taxes from you. They still demand income taxes. So that kind of destroys the argument about using the roads and using this. There's probably an argument as far as, if you get taken hostage or something, the United States might make an effort. And that would make sense if this were a voluntary situation, but right, it's not a legitimate contract. Citizenship is not a contract. The state is not a contract. So that all falls apart when they try to make those arguments. But of course, the Supreme Court rules that the police don't have any obligation to protect people. So something else that's pretty interesting comes from Politico here. This is actually about a month old, almost exactly a month old, from the 5th of May. All of the pro-Palestinian protesters calling Biden Genocide Joe. Turns out that they're actually being funded by big-name Democrats, Pritzker, Soros, Rockefeller. So Soros declined to comment. A spokesperson with the Open Society Foundations, of which Soros is the founder and chairman, said in a statement that it has funded a broad spectrum of U.S. groups that have advocated for the rights of Palestinians and Israelis and for peaceful resolution to the conflict in Israel. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which has previously funded the Tides Foundation and other groups, said it no longer has active grants to Tides. It also does not support Jewish Voice for Peace Also, Rockefeller Jr. sits on the board of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, given nearly $500,000 directly to Jewish Voice for Peace, which explicitly describes itself as anti-Zionist over the past 5 years. Rockefeller Brothers has separately given grants to both the Tides Foundation and the Tides Center. One of these groups is called the Jewish Voice for Peace. Apparently, they did not return a request for comment from Politico, but they have been a leader in disruptive protests against Biden, including shouting genocide supporter at his glitzy fundraiser at Radio City Music Hall in New York in March. It also protests on campuses across the country, and its statement immediately following the October 7th attacks said that the source of all this violence was Israeli apartheid and occupation, and United States complicity in that oppression. So, yes, indeed, pretty interesting article coming there from Politico. It's interesting how these groups, maybe it's getting out of the people's control who organize these groups. Maybe it's some sort of conspiracy, who knows. But it is just pretty interesting that there's these ties here and these particular events are taking place. A little peculiar. So here's a great one that I came across, which reminded me of back when I was in college. I had a discussion with, this was one of like the first chinks in my communist beliefs when I was younger. It didn't quite start the crumbling, but I did remember it made me very uncomfortable. So what happened was we were having a discussion about how we were going to incentivize. Incentives were probably involved, under socialism. He was questioning this, of course. So incentives were probably involved in something about how we were going to, quote, were going to decide, what gets produced and how much of what. So he was younger than me when I was in college. I was a little bit older, but this cat was younger than me, but he kind of already, understood the basics of why socialism didn't work. But I was a pretty staunch Marxist at that point. I was a little skeptical of the state, but I wasn't. I was pretty standard communist, more or less. So basically, what happened was he asked something about, what if people didn't want to do this, or what if they couldn't do it, or something. And my reply was basically something along the lines of, "We'll find something for them to do." And I remember he looked at me, and at the time I didn't really like him looking at me. It didn't strike me as why he would look at me that way. To me, I was like, well, I mean, what do you mean? It's democracy. Looking back, now the insanity of that statement is obvious to me. But then when you believe in it, it's easy. Well, it's easy for some people, obviously, to go from this belief that democracy is good. So why not extend that into all areas of social life, basically, right? And so that's kind of, I guess, where a communist is probably coming. He probably takes that as given. And that's kind of, I think, where my mind was at that, or where you go to it when you believe in this, when you accept these assumptions and advocate socialism. But anyway, so later I was questioning, it made me uncomfortable because, later after that discussion, later in the day, or maybe even a couple days later, I'm running through all of this in my head, and I'm just like, it makes me uncomfortable because, I started to realize that basically I was advocating that we, whoever that would be, i.e., obviously the state, would be dictating jobs to people. That's basically what I said. I didn't say those words, but in the context of the framework that socialism tries to create and that I was advocating for at the time, that's what it would end up being. And so the whole point of that story is that this article from Jacobin, socialism won't get rid of work, but it will allow us to work less under better conditions. Some leftists imagine a post-capitalist society will free everyone from the need to work, but the only realistic and fair way to manage production under socialism is to democratically distribute and share in the burdens of labor. So completely fine in a voluntary setting as long as you allow people to leave. Yeah, but when applied to the state, obviously it is slavery. What would that mean to Democrat, given the context of Marxism? I mean, what would that mean? That would mean everybody is essentially a slave to the state, or in the state has its dictatorship of the proletariat. It's going to democratically distribute the burdens of labor to the people. The people will democratically distribute the burdens of labor to themselves, I'm sure. Everybody will accept whatever burdens of labor the state democratically thrusts upon them because they are the new socialist man. And it will be fantastic. I imagine everybody will just be happy about it. And there won't be any death camps. It's just very interesting how the belief in authority can alter people's words, like that sentence, democratically distribute the burdens of labor. We all basically know what that means, but I guess individuals, and I know this is the case because I was one of them. They don't understand what that means in the context of the state, which, as I said, would basically be the state enslaving you and telling you what your job is. So, we've tried that before. Doesn't really matter how democratically you try to distribute political power. It's still all kind of the same thing. You're going to ensnare people in your so-called jurisdiction, and then democratically distribute the burden of labor that you guys have decided he needs to do. Because even if you go down to the like something like libertarian municipalism or something like this, if you're creating a political jurisdiction, it's most especially if you're keeping the current political jurisdictions, it's just like you just took it as is and just somehow reformed it to where like the city and municipal corporate borders are the current ones, then that's clearly not legitimate. I don't know how a socialist could say those are legitimate, but like how would they decide? Like, I mean, this is what's so crazy about this is how would you decide? Like, you either have to go global communism, or you have to, of course, retain some concept of political borders, because as a socialist, I'm saying, because how could you, like, how far does this burden of labor extend? In the sense that if I live on the outskirts of some municipality, or, I mean, I'm not even understanding what type of society they are envisioning and how they would decide who is involved in this. If they're just voluntarily doing this amongst themselves in their own private industry that they have created, okay. Then whatever. Yeah, you're all voluntarily there. You're Democrat. You're doing voluntary democracy, workplace democracy. That's fine. The state, not fine, because you are going to, like I said, ensnare all of these people in your illegitimate so-called political jurisdiction. So how would they not be the worst case of what they themselves call a capitalist in that sense? Well, maybe not to them, because at least it's democratically imposed upon you. I think I'll end it on that note. Pretty interesting headline there, especially that last one.